Get started in the interest of time, in respect of the presenters' schedules. We will get started. So we want to welcome you to the afternoon session, and it's been a very educational and insightful program so far, and we just want to thank the organizers for putting this wonderful activity together. All right, so we're going into our next session, which is a panel feature. It's called the industry feature. And during this period, we will be hearing from our three panelists who are seated to my left. I will introduce each before each speaks, and then at the end of their three speaking or presentations, we will field your questions, or they will field your questions, and I will be here to manage that process. So our three panelists are Mr. Donovan Wignall, who will be representing to some degree the business or the private sector industry and its role in the maritime sector. We will also be hearing from Mr. Omar Cheddar, who is very experienced in terms of the government role in terms of investment, and he's from the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. And then we'll be hearing from Dr. Adir, Karen Adir, who will speak to us from a more diplomatic perspective. She has had significant experience internationally, and also as a trainer and educational in terms of the role of maritime in our economies. So let me speak first a little bit more about Mr. Wignall. Mr. Wignall has been a leader in the logistics industry for more than 25 years, and his roles have been in the customs department, and he has been even with the former Cable and Wireless, which is now Flow, where he has been at the level of logistics or shipping and logistics manager. And now he does his own customs broking and logistics firm, which is called Miratrans International Logistics Limited, and Courier Online Shopping Fulfillment Company, and other such businesses. So he's also the president of the MSME, that's Micro, Small, and Medium Size Enterprise Alliance. For the past 7 years, he's been advocating for better business environment for small businesses. And educationally, he has a diploma in international shipping and logistics, and has a bachelor's and a master's in logistics and supply chain from this very university, the CMU. So he's going to be bringing to us a perspective from the industries, especially the small and medium-sized enterprise sector. And so without further ado, I'll invite Mr. Wignall to speak, but he'll be seated while he speaks. Mr. Wignall, over to you.
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, the heads of the CMU, president. I might just say all protocols being previously observed, and you'll allow me to proceed. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, being in the industry and being on both sides of the industry, you kind of get a bird's eye view of everything that is happening on both sides. So, working with the Customs Department for a number of years, then Going into the private sector, you basically get a fair idea of what are the needs on both sides. So for example, on the customs side, they'll be concerned with the collection of revenue and the securing of our borders. And on the industry side, they are primarily concerned with efficiency on the ports and looking for opportunities entrepreneurially to basically grow their business and to primarily make a profit. So that being said, I basically just did a short writing about end-to-end logistics and the challenges that are facing the Caribbean. These challenges pretty much impacts the small business sector more than any because their volumes are pretty much very small, and for them to move small amounts of cargo across borders, they will have to go into what is called consolidation. And lanes into the different Caribbean islands are not normally, are not available, but differently I'm thinking now because of what I am going to say futuristically, Dr. Telemac stated that we have a Caribbean feeder service that basically carries small amounts of cargo, containerized nonetheless, from Jamaica to the rest of the Caribbean. But let's look at end-to-end logistics and what is involved there. So end-to-end logistics covers a complete logistics cycle, starting with procurement, that is the getting of the goods, the purchasing, distribution, how those goods leave from where they are purchased from, transport from one jurisdiction to another, delivery to the end customer, which we call last mile delivery, and ending up with return logistics, meaning that either the empty container or goods which have been modified in some way, value added, some value added to those goods to be sent back to the jurisdiction or other jurisdiction where they come from. So a 5PL logistics provider would be that is fifth party. Very strong gentleman. Probably I'm late. Yes, so 5PL is here to handle every aspect of the logistics supply chain. So making a 5PL logistics provider the ideal service provider for end-to-end logistics in providing these services. And these 5PL meaning they take care of everything from the A to the Z. They purchase, ship, organize the shipping, organize payment, etc. So let me give you an example. For example, let's use Caribbean Maritime, for example. If Caribbean Maritime came to me and said they need an actuator from Germany, because I see that they're going into logistics from that Festo center that they have, very wonderful piece of, place in the school there. And they need that piece of equipment. They come to me and said, Mr. Wignall, I need this actuator from Germany to repair our machine that we have in the Festo Center. And I said, okay, give me the supplier details. And I reach out to the supplier. They would have provided me with a pro forma invoice from the supplier. And I contact the supplier, pay the supplier for the goods, organize the shipping from the supplier to Jamaica, and organize clearance and last mile delivery to Caribbean Maritime Institute. And a lot of us do that as logistics providers. So that's an example of 5PL operation. 5PL operations make use of the 7 Ps of logistics. According to the Chartered Institute of London, the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport in the UK, 2019, it defines the 7 Ps as getting the right product in the right quantity, in the right condition, at the right place, at the right time, to the right customer, at the right price. A lot of work. So let's look at some of the challenges in achieving the mission within the Caribbean. let's talk about the geography of the region. The Caribbean, in simple terms, consists of the Greater Antilles, Dominican, Haiti, Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Grand Cayman, the Lesser Antilles, Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, St. Kitts, Antigua and Barbuda, from where Mr. Telemac comes from, etc. And lately, due to supply chain disruption caused by the COVID pandemic, for the purposes of logistics, includes countries in South America that has a coastline that borders the Caribbean Sea. So because of the pandemic, China lockdown, can't get cargo there, all of a sudden people now start looking to South America to get your cargo. South America is a huge market, and I wonder why we haven't been looking to South America to supply us with goods and material that we need for our industry here in Jamaica and probably for the rest of the Caribbean. Somebody said to me earlier in a conversation that we don't speak Spanish, that's why we don't really go down to South America, but we don't speak Chinese. And we buy a lot of cargo from China and other places that do not speak English. So, 4 hours by plane to anywhere in the Lesser Antilles, 8 days or more by vessel. And those vessels will do a milk run. And I'm not talking about a feeder service now. Those vessels will do a milk run between the different islands. So a vessel will leave here, probably seaboard or tropical, go to Barbados and leave Barbados, go to Trinidad to Guyana, then to Antigua, Barbuda, etc., etc., etc. So it takes a very long time for your cargo to reach a destination in the Caribbean. So it's 90 minutes by plane to Miami, 3 days or less to Miami by ship, and 5 days by Halifax all the way up to Canada. So 5 days to Canada. So you reach Canada quicker than you reach another Caribbean island. Another factor that we have to consider for the Caribbean transport of goods, which affects not just MSMEs but any other business, is the combined population of most, if not all, the Caribbean islands in the Lesser Antilles equals to the population of little or more than half the population of Jamaica. Not big populations down there. Jamaica, which is the third largest island in the Greater Antilles, of course. Referencing Mr. Telemac again, logistics is driven by supply and demand. Large population centers drive demand, and where there is demand, logistics services are needed to get the cargo to those places that has a need for raw materials, materials for manufacturing, food for the population, fuel for the country's energy needs, building materials for the construction sector, etc. There is a reasonable demand for cargo from the Greater Antilles to the Lesser Antilles, but the reverse is not the same, meaning that there is little demand for cargo flowing northwest from the Lesser to the Greater Antilles. Where there is low demand, there's not going to be much entrepreneurial interest in the provision of logistics services, as there are likely any other business, any business wants to be in business to make a profit. They are profit driven. So if putting in a service down to the Caribbean is not profitable, it will not happen, or not in any great measure. Lessons of historic failure. We had our shipping company, Wisco, West Indies Shipping Company, that started the service some time ago, but that since failed. And the infrastructure generally down in the Lesser Antilles does not really support, outside of what Mr. Telemac showed us earlier about the development in his country, which is phenomenal. And a few other countries, including Barbados and Trinidad, would have very developed ports, but the others have challenges where handling containerized cargo is concerned. Jamaica has a reasonable output of tonnage going to the Lesser Antilles, and of late, mostly due to COVID-19 pandemic, inbound from South America due to importers seeking nearshore suppliers to circumvent the supply chain bottlenecks in the traditional sources of goods and supplies in the Far East, Europe, and North America, making the often used maxim ring true. My words, of course, opportunities are always presented in the worst of times in any industry. So the opportunities presented during COVID we're taking advantage of. So people know when searching and found suppliers in South America. And across the full gamut of businesses, they were able to get supplies at a good time. South America is not that far from Jamaica, into Jamaica to supply some of the needs that we had. We had some shortages and shortfalls for a while, but after a time, supplies almost normalized. Not fully normal yet, but we're getting goods, a lot of goods out of South America as we speak. Sheets, rock, lumber, building materials, and some other things. I suppose as we go along, we'll find out what else South America offers that we can make use of. So leadership. How can leadership influence a positive change in the end-to-end logistics in the Caribbean? I suppose we could look at leadership from two angles, possibly three. The first one is entrepreneurial. The meaning of entrepreneurial is having to do with the creation and development of economic ventures. One who organizes, manages, and assumes the risk of businesses or enterprise. Intra-regional trade has grown, but still has a far way to go. Hopefully, as the different economies mature and demand for goods and raw material increases, we will see a commensurate increase in the logistics services, which will mean increased investment in the sector. Of course, where there's a demand, if the demand for shipping services from the different regions increase, then some smart entrepreneur will always want to take advantage of the opportunities that is presented and put in a service that can take cargo from here to there and from there back to here. The other consideration where leadership is concerned is political. The body politic of countries in the region deciding to invest in infrastructure that will attract businesses that will drive demand for logistics services. For example, the Jamaica Logistics Hub initiative and the SCG project, and I think Professor Errol Mclean is here, who was a major driver of both of those projects. We haven't finished the logistics hub yet, but the SCG under your watch is up and running, right? And just speaking a little bit about the SEZ, one thing with the SEZ, it's a special economic zone. It is treated as a free zone, so small businesses are like big business, just the same, can set up in those areas and import into the island. It is treated like a separate country. So goods and services come into the island, whatever is done to it, and if it goes back out, it's treated as an export, regular export from another country, but coming into the island, treated as an import. The advantage of that is that big companies, international companies, for example, you have the chip shortage in the US now where they can't manufacture cars as much as they do. And a country decide to come and set up a manufacturing plant inside the SEZ. That would actually be a good thing, where everything would be done inside there, and it actually would be near to the markets, the North America, the South America, etc., where they are manufacturing cars. So it presents them an advantage where actually they really don't have to go that far all the way into China. The different laws govern the SEZ. So therefore, with those advantages, it becomes a good thing for them to come in those areas and do their manufacturing. Amazon, for example, could come and set up a hub inside the SEZ where they open and operate a warehouse in the SEZ. When somebody makes an order from Jamaica, instead of bringing that order all the way from the United States or whichever warehouse in whatever country it's coming from, it is probably less than an hour away in the special economic zone. The other consideration for leadership is educational. The Caribbean Maritime University provides logistics-ready candidates to handle demand for potential growth in the logistics industry, both regionally and internationally. And again, you would have heard Mr. Telemack reference that 21 students from the Caribbean Maritime Institute would have been trained and be ready to grow, to be a part of the industry, that new port that he would have implemented, get it up and running. It is up and running, but the school trains industry-ready candidates to go into those different areas to supply the demand or the perceived demand that would have arisen because of increased economic activity. I think one past president of the CMU, one thing he always said was that you build it first and then you go find markets for what you have built, which I think is a good idea, and I think that is the case with the special economic zone. You build it and then you go and find the different participants to fill it. So leadership from the standpoint of the school, there, I think Caribbean Maritime University continue to present the industry not just locally or Caribbean-wide, but internationally with work-ready candidates to fill the different vacancies in the industry that are so needed internationally right now. What I would love to see, though, Dr. Adir, is the Caribbean Maritime University. I don't know if they're doing it yet, but drop in a course for entrepreneurship. I don't know if that is there, but I think it would be a wonderful idea to not only train for the practical aspects of the industry, but also the business aspect as to how, if the candidates from the industry decide to go out there and form their own freight forwarding company, their own custom broking company, their own shipping company, their own shipping line, they have fundamental and basic information as how a business operates and the different aspects of business to at least guarantee them, fundamental information and to help them to trot on the way to success. We have seen over the past 24 months, I could not leave here without mentioning the opportunities for the end-to-end logistics that were provided by the COVID pandemic. We have seen over the past 24 to 36 months, talking from 2019, late 2019, the proliferation of courier services formed by entrepreneurs to take advantage of the pivot to online shopping due to the challenges that arose in going to the traditional, they're leaving the traditional brick and mortar setups and going into online stores. You would have seen Walmart, Brandsmart, all those stores now you can go, not just Amazon alone, but you can go pretty much to any big conglomerate stores out of the United States and China, Alibaba, and you can purchase anything, and through 5Pay logistics, all of those goods can come to your country and come in good time, right place, right price. I myself started Pass Post Courier Services. You would have seen, shameless plug. You would have seen my staff outside here trying to promote the company. We have started this company during the time and encourage my fellow alumnus to, of course, support us. We definitely would appreciate the support. www.passpost.online. We clear and we take the goods right to you. As I close this brief presentation, I'd like to thank the CMU for the opportunity to share and look forward to fielding questions as I participate in the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wignall. All right, so we'll move next to Mr. Cheddar, and so Mr. Cheddar is been working with the government of Jamaica. He is the director of the investment unit at the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. And he has a history working with the public sector especially, but also and in private sector development through development of policy and analysis and doing project implementation for investment projects, international trade projects, energy, environmental, and such for small business development. And he's been involved in several infrastructure projects for the government and worked on reform in terms of incentives for businesses, such as import or duties, things of that nature that facilitate investment in the country. He also works with negotiations with other countries in terms of bilateral agreements, trade agreements, investment treaties, and such. And he works on just general national investment policies that support business in Jamaica, and also has been working significantly with the special economic zones. So currently his responsibility includes the development of policies and programs to expand investment and to maximize their benefits while he collaborates with the stakeholders locally and internationally. So thank you, Mr. Cheddar, for offering to come, and over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues, participants. I'm honored to be here this afternoon to present at this conference. I think the CMU is a very important institution, and I applaud the work that it's doing. My presentation will really look at some new developments globally that are affecting special economic zones, and make some recommendations as to how Jamaica should adapt to these developments. So I will start off by just giving a global overview of what's happening with special for those who are not familiar with the term special economic zones, these are really, they originated as free trade zones based on changing trade rules through the WTO, that's the World Trade Organization. A lot of these zones, in fact, those countries that signed on to the agreement in the WTO, and which would really be most countries, it's called the WTO Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures. They were required to change from an export subsidy model for these zones to one that was more value added and allow exports from these zones into the internal territory as long as appropriate export duties are charged, right? So this is what created this shift from free trade zones to special economic zones. And since then, many new zones have been created as special economic zones. They were not free trade zones, but they started as special economic zones in conformity with WTO requirements. And just to note that in Jamaica we have standalone zones, meaning that a company could be designated as a special economic zone, especially in the business process outsourcing area. So it does not necessarily mean a geographical area containing several companies. It could just be one company for certain sectors. But if you look at this slide, you will see that the use of special economic zones has mushroomed over the years. It's a strategy many countries are now using to spur their economic development, including Jamaica, and it is an integral part of our logistics hub initiative. So, as you will see from this slide, China, of course, is the greatest user of special economic zones, and you might be surprised to see the Russian Federation as number 5, and the United States, a developed economy, the largest economy in the world, depending on what measure you use, is number 4. So, a very interesting lineup of countries from developed to developing, basically going through all the stages of development, are using special economic zones. So I spoke to what is considered a special economic zone when I started, and in this slide you can see that it's, in some regions it's defined as a confined territory, not necessarily one location and not necessarily fenced, although that might be the case. It's a region where companies operating in that region enjoy certain privileges, and as I mentioned before, it could actually be just one company. and there's usually a separate administration governing these zones. And basically, these entities or regions that are classified as special economic zones, they're about production, right? Either goods or services. So a transshipment area would not really be considered a special economic zone, because in a special economic zone, we're looking at value added. So whatever is coming into the zone, there's some value being added into it in terms of assembly or packaging or some other type of value. And many countries use different terms for special economic zones. Some refer to it as export processing zone, free trade zone, free zone, free economic zone, or free trade zone. So sometimes the terminology is historical, even though the regulatory aspect has changed, but they just keep the name that they started with. Why are special economic zones popular with policymakers? It gives a strategic focus. Especially in large economies, there are so many regulations. In countries with different states, each state might have a different governance structure. So by having a zone, it makes the focus simpler for investors, right? The regulatory framework and governance, it's easier to establish operations in a zone, and usually the zone authority will manage all the regulatory complexity for the investor. And this makes a value proposition for investors clearer. So special economic zones have a close relationship with key productive capacity issues. As I alluded to earlier, countries use special economic zones to spur development in different areas, to get integrated into value chains, to build clusters, attract foreign direct investment, and also to build their business network. The regulatory framework for special economic zones is very critical. This is what will make or break a zone. You have to have the right customs and trade rules. You have to have the right investment promotion strategy and facilitation. Many special economic zones benefit from a one-stop shop facilitator. There are special rules to enter into the zones which facilitate foreign direct investment, special real estate laws, special tax incentives, and of course special labor and environmental regulations. So a zone is an area that can be ring-fenced both metaphorically and literally from the rest of the economy, and it's useful to do different experiments in terms of what kind of regulations will work in a specific geographical area. So there's no one size that fits all. High-income countries use zones in a particular way to focus on complex cross-border supply chains and to avoid distortions in the economy. Upper middle income countries, they use zones to attract high-tech industries and upgrade innovation capabilities. Middle income countries, they use zones to integrate into global value chains and support industrial upgrading. And low income economies, they use zones as an industrialization strategy. So according to research conducted by UNCTAD, we see that most countries, most investment promotion agencies in different countries, they have found that special economic zones, they have increased significantly foreign direct investment into the country. And this is a strategy that Jamaica is using. So some of the lessons learned from experiences internationally, have to do with the need to integrate these zones dynamically into the development strategy of the country, in Jamaica's case, or National Development Plan Vision 2030. The zones need to complement existing competitive advantages. They need to take into account the national investment climate and governance capabilities. And these zones have to be self-financing, because you wouldn't want to establish a zone and then it becomes a burden on the government finances, because the government is actually looking to increase their revenues from these zones. And it's a complex process, because you have to get many things right, and it depends on the sector you're targeting and the kind of FDI you want to attract. You can promote clusters and linkages in these zones. You need to set clear goals and performance metrics for economic and environment, social governance contributions. So now I will move to some of the developments that are happening internationally that can affect zones globally and also in Jamaica. The Organization for Economic Cooperation is an organization with many high to middle income countries, and they have proposed a global minimum tax. And in fact, many of these countries have signed on to this proposal. What this means is that it will affect our tax incentives and the kinds of incentives that you have for special economic zones. They are proposing a minimum corporate tax rate of 15%, right? In Jamaica, our zone tax is 12.5%, and it goes down to as low as 7.5% based on other factors in terms of research and development and employment and so on. So if this global minimum tax is implemented, and it seems as if it will be coming on stream by next year, the latest, we will have to re-examine how we structure our incentives. This global minimum tax will discourage multinational enterprises from shifting profits to low tax countries and reduce tax competition. So in theory, this is good, because when there's a tax competition, many countries, they don't get the taxes that they should from the production that is happening in the country from foreign direct investment, and a lot of this investment becomes extractive in that the profits are being shipped out of the country, but the investors are benefiting from various local government support. The global minimum tax is designed to create a level playing field for companies internationally. There have been complaints about domestic small businesses having to pay higher taxes, and large multinationals paying, based on their ability to structure their operations and transfer pricing, they pay little or no taxes. And so this global minimum tax is designed to eradicate that. And also, by implementing the global minimum tax, developing countries will have access to more tax revenues to support domestic resource mobilization to achieve the sustainable development goals as outlined by the United Nations. One of the developments that could arise from this new global minimum tax is the diversion of investment from low to higher tax jurisdictions. And that would actually benefit the developed countries and higher income countries who are putting forward this proposal to the disadvantage of lower income countries, which have to rely heavily on tax incentives to attract investment because of the higher risk of operating in some of these lower income countries. This means that more focus will have to be placed on infrastructure and the regulatory and institutional environment to attract foreign direct investment. So as I said before, the effectiveness of tax incentives will be diminished. There's some disagreement among OECD countries about the global minimum tax. I think one or two of them might not want to sign on as it is presently structured, but nevertheless, even if a minimum of OECD countries implemented the minimum tax, it would have a global effect and would start affecting developing countries. So the recommendation is for developing countries like Jamaica to start examining their tax structure and act before some OECD countries implement the minimum tax. Another complicating factor has to do with investment treaties. A lot of FDI has been set up in countries based on a particular tax structure, which is protected by the bilateral investment treaties between countries. So if the tax change is large enough or significant enough, it could be considered expropriation under the treaty, and then this would lead to international arbitration and a lot of complications for host countries. So in looking at restructuring your tax framework, you have to take into account the treaties you have in place and how will those treaties respond to changes in your tax framework. It is proposed to implement a grandfathering strategy where existing investors would continue to benefit from the existing tax structure, but it would be gradually phased out over 5 to 10 years. And it has also been proposed to implement a stopgap mechanism for the return of the tax differential accruing to developed countries to developing countries. I'm not sure if I explained it clearly enough, but the global minimum tax is 15%. So if you have a tax rate of, let's say, 10%, what that means is that the home country that investor is from, let's say the US, we have an investor from the US can then top up the 10% that you're charging in Jamaica by 5%, and so they would obtain the 5%, right? Basically, based on tax treaties that exist and tax agreements, companies are not double taxed. They're taxed in only one country, right? In most cases. So if we're charging them 10% in Jamaica and the global minimum tax is 15%, the US can then take the 5%, and then you're losing 5% because in Jamaica you could just increase that 10% to 15% and you have the whole 15%. So that was a very simplification of the measure, but it outlines the challenge developing countries are facing in that you are losing tax revenues to developed countries, and you need the revenue even more because the investment is in your country. So these are some of the challenges we have to look at. Another development that is impacting special economic zones and supply chains has to do with the COVID-19 pandemic and geopolitical tensions. And I think some of the presenters spoke about that earlier today. There are 4 trajectories that are taking place with investment, and it depends on the company and the sector. There's reshoring, diversification, regionalization, and replication. In reshoring, we see foreign direct investment pulling out of certain countries. We see countries taking a different approach to investment. Previously, investors were looking at how to increase the efficiency of their operations and lower cost. Now that is not the primary concern. They're concerned about how, to minimize disruption and risk. And, this will lead to access to and upgrading along global value chains becoming more difficult. Another trajectory has to do with diversification. In response to the increased risk, companies are careful about putting too much investment into one location. So, the investment is becoming more asset light, shifting to intangibles and services. As you know, some industries, the barrier to entry and exit are high, right? So those types of industries, there will be a lot more caution about shifting those types of investment out of the home country. So the investment becomes, lighter and not so heavily industrial as before. And a lot of it depends on the digital infrastructure existing in the host country. There's also a move to regionalization, where the investment is looking at regional markets, accessing regional markets rather than global, staying close to home. A shift from investment in dispersed vertical global value chain segments to investment in broader industrial bases and clusters, and regional economic cooperation becomes even more important. And CARICOM at this time is looking at a regional investment policy, which would include an investment code and regional incentives to make the CARICOM region, a harmonized area for investment rather than competition among CARICOM member states. So CARICOM is actually looking at this regionalization approach. And there is replication. In some cases, investment is looking at quickly replicating products in a market through 3D printing and using technology. And so they're shifting from large-scale industrial activity to small-scale distributed manufacturing. And this means that there has to be a greater supporting infrastructure, including digital infrastructure, to be in place. And finally, climate change. Everyone is talking about climate change. We're seeing all the weather disruptions happening recently, and so investors now are more focused on environment, social, and governance factors, as part of their portfolio of investments. So investors will be shying away from sectors and industries that are seen as having a negative impact on the environment. So one of the strategies for building special economic zones going forward will have to be low carbon green investment strategies with clear goals and greenhouse gases mitigation effects. One benefit of what is happening now is that a lot of funding is going towards climate change adaptation and mitigation, and there are opportunities to tap into this funding to develop innovative projects. So these are some of the issues that we're looking at in Jamaica and which are guiding our own policy development and project development going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cheddar.
I think the new one will come up.
And certainly not least, we finally have Dr. Karen Adir. And Dr. Adir has also a significant number of years, 25 years over, in experience in working really as a educator, team builder, and to some degree in diplomatically in the maritime sector. In terms, she's worked with trade facilitation and training and education in these capacities. She's also had the responsibility for managing and supervising and working on projects related to international competitiveness, modernization of system processes, and capacity building in maritime sector. She's also known for her work with CARICOM in streamlining their processes and relationship building while she ensures that individual policy objectives are met. And as said before, she's experienced in education and trading, and she's been a pioneer really in maritime training, working with the Caribbean Maritime University. And she has written a number of training manuals in customs, cargo processing, maritime, and generally the logistics industry. So we're pleased to have you here in this capacity, Dr. Adir, and so over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everybody. The recent disruption had a tremendous effect not only on human life, but also on the global logistics sector. And this effect trickled down into the leadership on the logistics sector. And the entire gamut of effect in the logistics sector affected whether you were developing, whether you were big or small. And when we look at it, it's said to us how we operated in the sector. It created a big question mark. What were we doing? Were we doing it right? Or were we doing it wrong? And what a question mark it created. Can you imagine? We were in this globalized business since the 1980s, and now we have a disruption. And it said, uh-oh, what was this? Okay? So when we looked at it and we said, what were the most glaring effects on us? It said, in global logistics, the first thing we said was transport costs was no longer important. And because transport costs was no longer important, we could locate industries at low-cost centers. So China and such areas, global logistics could really benefit from these low-cost centers. It says pricing was very important. It said when we looked at what happened because of the pandemic, we said what we saw was tremendous changes in demand. And as a result, some of the goods that we were using, we saw changes in demand. Okay? So what I'm actually trying to say is that it led us to question the fundamental principles. So some of the fundamental principles began to change. So this big question came about. logistics, the pandemic says, aha, the fundamental principles. And then, as we moved along and we saw countries begin to recover and we saw some resilience, we asked another question. Why are some countries recovering and looking more resilient, and some of us are not recovering so quickly? What do they have that we don't have? And what we saw was, first thing we saw government policies and programs. And when we looked at these government policies and programs, what did they say? We said, these government policies and programs that started the recovery process, one of the first things that the government policies and programs said was financial assistance. The government policy and program said, even long before the pandemic, they had looked into the environment and they saw change. When we looked at Germany, for example, as early as 2008, the Germans saw that there was changes were beginning to occur, and they said, what did these changes 10 years before the pandemic required? And they said, e-capacity. So a whole decade before the pandemic, the Germans said, we need to begin to do something. And so they started to do it. Okay? And when we looked at others, we saw that they said that because they had substantial interest and investment in logistics, they needed to begin to integrate their environment in a technologically savvy manner so that they could communicate with one another and begin to move. So what we are saying that they saw the need to begin to do something. And so when we say, what do they have? That is what they had. So they saw that an integrated technological system was what they had. And when we looked at the Caribbean, at the time of recovery, at the time of the pandemic, or you say, to what extent were they preparing themselves? We can say that they did not have any of these features. So, and then we say to ourselves, and what is this thing we called E2E? Right? E2E. Right? E2E. We say it's a wonderful tool. It is a tool that helps us to become more resilient. It is data. It is an interface that helps us to become more robust, more flexible, and integrate. As everybody said, from morning, it helps us from procurement to the delivery. So what we are saying that in a time of disruption, we are going to need a mechanism that is going to guide us through the disruption. But what we are also saying is that we are going to need a tool that is more than just technology. It needs management capability. It needs more than just technology. It needs procedure as well as just technology. So it goes well just beyond technology, okay? And we are saying this is what E2E is, okay? Fine. All right. So here is what it looks like in a very basic and simple design. So this simple diagram is just showing us how it connects everybody from supplier right through the process. Right? So here's our very basic diagram. Right? Good. Right? And then we say to ourselves, if you are E2E, what does it do? We say, okay, so if you are E2E, how do you communicate? We say user to user for data service, for example. You should be able to, you should have that if you are E2E. You have technological interface that enables you to go cross borders. You have technological interface that enables communication between different IT systems. So when we are E2E savvy, we are able to do this and more. That's what we are saying. Right? Good. And if I am a user, how do I benefit if I am E2E, if I have this? I say, how am I better off for having it? I can forecast. So I can have market information about my customers, okay? Fine. I can have market information about my customers, right? I can do that. I can do demand analysis. I can work with my suppliers, and very important, right? I can address weaknesses in the supply chain. And that is what I want, because I'm in an environment for which I have disruption. That is what I want. So this is why it is useful and good for me. And so this is why I am so much better off now that I have this tool. Right? Good. So I am now saying the Caribbean economies, right? And I'm saying, look at St. Vincent, for example. St. Vincent had volcanic eruption. And St. Vincent not only had volcanic eruption, they had pandemic. What we would say in Jamaica, a double whammy. And great expense. So now, here is St. Vincent, and the Grenadines, a very small country, now with a level of disruption that is virtually unaffordable to this small country, right? So they now will now have to seek some form of help to be able to deal with this level of disruption. And in addition to that, they are going to need to find the capability and the capacity to deal with this disruption. That is what we are saying. Right? Good. And we are saying, we are saying, in the Caribbean, the level of recovery and resilience, it is going at a relatively slow pace. We are saying it's going up at a slow pace because we are saying when we look at our islands, we are saying high debt to GDP ratio, we are saying where we are with the logistics process. Some of the islands are doing well. Yes, they are doing well. Like Jamaica, some of them are doing well, so they will perhaps have the capacity, but some of them, because where they are, they will not have the capacity, and they are already in debt, so they will have to borrow, right? And we are also saying that where their commodity trade is, the prices are poor, so they are going to be challenged, right? So what are we saying? We are saying that we might have to depend on regional projects to give us some support, right? So that's what we are saying. We are saying we have to have some regional projects to give us some support. And we are saying, and how many regional projects do we have to give us e-capacity support? And we are saying, prior to 2018, we did not see many. Or where we saw them, it might not have been pure logistics or logistics for trading. It might have been for another purpose. Because when we look at the early logistics projects that had E2 capacity, it was mainly for food security. CARICOM, the World Food Program, 2018, 2019. But it did bring E2E exposure to the region, and E2E training, and E2E equipment and software. But its true purpose was for food security. And we have not seen many more E2E of that nature. But what we have seen since that is, you see companies like Kingston Wharves, they have E2E capacity because they are the region's multi-purpose port, and they have to serve the region, so they have E2E capacity. They have E2E capacity. And also, we see some shipping lines. If you use their service, you get E2E. So this is how the E2E comes to the region. This is how you get it. And you see other little private sector companies with E2E. All right, good. So, but when you compare it with our other regions have their E2E capacities, and if you compare it, say, with the more developed regions, there is a big gap. All right, good. So, if we say that is not just E2E alone that build resilience, we have to marry the E2E with leadership. In fact, we have to say that for E2E to succeed, it needs leadership to guide the process and to make it more effective and to build the demand, right? Good. So we could say that, and you need to have stability, and you need a leader that will enable you to say what must we understand and what must we create so that we can have good and effective E2E? And the answer is good and effective leadership. Okay? So that is what we can say. And we can say, and what is the model of leadership that we must have so that we can have good and effective leadership? And we could say that, okay, we need to have a generation of leadership which will use predictive tools to apply technological solutions to say, okay, E2E and other technological applications, real-time data, how to reconfigure the supply chain, and this will make the model work well. And then we will say, yes, this is how we can drive the process. Right? And then we could say now, what strategy must we now use to ensure that the technological re-engineering is in place so that we can have long-term success? We could say that the recovery program should have two components. We say, first, we should look at the logistics environment and say, are there any challenges there that we must address? And having addressed those, then we can implement a program that would lead to the success of the transformation of the sector. And the answer is a resounding yes. So we can say that there are the leadership should confront the challenges in the logistics environment, and then they should design a program for the success of the program. So we can say that there are some blatant challenges in the logistics sector. For example, the logistics sector in the Caribbean is not as competitive as it should be. It is a sector which has high transport costs. It has some gaps in the human resource capability. It has some technological gaps. And the level of reinvestment is not very high. And so if we address those, then we can look at how we can talk about having a good and effective and advanced technological driven sector, right? And then we can say we could have an E-driven sector. First, short run. Second, long run. And we could say the short run program, we could say the technological systems that we have now, Asikuda World. And we could take Asikuda World, Port Community System, and authorized economic operators. So Asikuda World would be the platform, and then you integrate it with other systems, and you make it like that. And then that is your existing technologies that you are trying to make it E2E. And then you say, what is your long-term program? Your long-term program now is to create new initiatives to drive a long-term sector. And then you do things like create a regional resilience fund, you'd create your performance standards, your technological change environment, and so on and so forth. And with that, finally, your action plan for the success of the E2E rollout, and that is that. And I will stop here.
All right, thank you, Dr. Adir. I will just ask if anyone feel 2 questions to the panelists, if there is anybody who's interested. We want to really respect the time, so would have gone longer. Have a question, sir? Please go ahead.
I was just trying to go as fast as I could.
Okay, thank you very much, panelists. Excellent presentations from all of you. I wanted to ask a question to Dr. Adir and also follow up with Mr. Wignall, because the two, it's related. In terms of end-to-end resiliency, one of the issues which you didn't touch on in much detail was the software side. In creating that E2E resiliency, especially for SMEs, what we find is that that software requirement tends to be very, very expensive. And how do you suggest that a mechanism where the software requirement to create that resiliency to support SMEs could be created?
What I was thinking is that we would have a resilience fund, and I would say, what I was thinking is that we could have a fund, and what we would want, in this fund, we want contribution from the various stakeholders. That is what I had in mind. So that is how I see it could be funded, because my impression is that it's going to cost some money. And so we have to say now, how do we? That is why I'm saying it is going to take a longer time for that to happen. That is why I put it in my long-term plan and say, okay, now this is the sector. This is the sector, and how can we get contributions from the various stakeholders? Like if this is the logistics sector, these are the people in shipping, these are the people in warehousing, and so on and so forth. That's the only way I see it can be funded, because it is expensive. That is the only way I see it working.
Mr. Cheddar, do you have a response? Or Mr.
Right, let me just quickly jump in. Usually for the sector, because it's a private sector, it's usually very difficult to get fellow private sector actors to contribute to any fund that will provide their competitors with the tools to compete with them effectively. The government, on the other hand, through the Development Bank of Jamaica, does provide a Go Digital assistance program. I don't remember the exact name.
Yeah.
But I think that program, what it does is provides not a lot of money. I think it's about 400,000, between 400 and 800,000. I think the program is still going on, where you apply. No, not yes, unfortunately. But for the 800,000 to assist with the digitization of different.
I saw that in many of the developed countries.
Right. So as far as that is concerned, it's not a lot of money, but of course, getting software is expensive. Myself being involved in a sector that does need proprietary software to manage our operations, look to countries like India, where you have Indians that provide software development at a pretty cheap rate, because they're at a dime a dozen, and they work 24/7 to develop proprietary software for our business, which is currently being done, and it is affordable. So that in conjunction, so finding cheap source in conjunction with government help, that's two ways in which we can actually helped to build some robust resilience to what COVID presented.
I saw it in Germany. I
Thank
saw
you.
it in Germany.
Anyone
There
else?
was actually technology.
So it was
That is how they started.
Similar to what
Yes.
Dr. Adir was saying that there's a German government that provided a fund
Yes.
to provide that for digitization. I have one brief question, sir. So I take a takeaway from the presentations to some degree is that the the contribution of logistic has shifted away, or the focus has shifted away from cost reduction and convenience toward more security, the security of the business of a business. Would you say that's so?
definitely have to have security because then you're looking at online financial transactions. So with the prevalence now of online scamming and not just somebody calling you and telling that you want some money for a competition that you didn't take part in, but people who are using innovative ways to get your information the other day. So we're looking at, for example, this guy on Facebook message somebody and tell it from somebody's account to tell them that they need to talk to them, they're in trouble, whatever, and then that person provided information to somebody who wasn't the actual person, and it was happening very successfully for a time until somebody found out. But generally, security of the transactions absolutely important, but actually getting to the place where you get the software, that's a challenge for many SMEs, and of course, them competing effectively with their bigger peers, their larger peers in the same industry, is a definite challenge for them.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else comments? All right. Thank you to our three panelists. Before you exit the stage, just want to give you a yes, go ahead.
I congratulate President Andrew Spence. I don't see him.
He was just here.
He was, oh, congrats. You have inherited a phenomenal school, and I saw the Festa video. It's actually in the Economic Development Group with all the ministers, and I see them digging up Minister Favor Williams with it. So kudos, and I think just keep it going. All right.
All right. Thank you, audience, for your contribution.
And don't worry, folks, the day is almost done. I'm going to invite my able colleague, Mrs. Myrna Ellis Medina, to come forward. And Mrs. Ellis Medina is going to chair. Her profile is in our book, by the way, because she's also a researcher presenter. She's going to chair our final section for today, which is the future of the cruise industry post-COVID. So I'm going to invite the presenters for this section forward. Natola, Mrs. Spencer, Mrs. Diana Spencer, Ms. Natola Meredith, Professor Ibrahim Ajaguna, and Dr. Aaron Garfield. It's right here in the book, Mclean. Over to you, Mrs. Medina.
Okay, pleasant good afternoon to everyone. You know, it said, the race is not for the swift, but for those that would endure to the end. I want you to give yourself a round of applause for enduring to the end. World Maritime Day, September 29. Theme, new technologies, green shipping. But guess what? World Tourism Day was September 27th. And the theme was rethinking tourism. This segment marries maritime and tourism as we look at cruise tourism. You know, the earth is made up of 71% water. And the cruise industry has been growing at a rate of 7% each year, pre-pandemic figures. I want to tell you, the cruise industry is a resilient industry. The COVID-19 is not the first shock that the cruise industry has experienced. In 1990, there was the Gulf War. In 2003, there was SARS. In 2007, there was the world financial crisis. In 2011, there was 9/11. And in 2020-21, there was the COVID-19. So the session this afternoon is looking at the future of the cruise industry post-COVID-19. But I can tell you, based on past trends, this industry has always been able to rebound. But the presenters will tell you a little bit about what they found out in their research. We have 4 presenters with us this afternoon. First, we're going to have Natola Meridet, and she is going to present along with Professor Ibrahim Ajaguna. Next, we have the First Lady of Caribbean Maritime University. Nobody understood that. All presidents have a First Lady. So the First Lady is going to present on the topic, Cruising on Choppy Seas, the revitalization of Jamaica as a cruise destination post-COVID-19. Following her, Ms. Sandra Casanova is going to speak to us on the topic, an analysis of the post-COVID-19 cruise industry. Could this be a new possibility for the luxury yacht sector in the Caribbean? And finally, our dear Dr. Errol Mclean will speak to us on, or answer the question, can Jamaica's cruise administrators re-strategize, strengthen inclusiveness, expand attractions, and gather more revenue? As I invite Ms. Nicola Meridet to the podium, or to take the mic, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her. Ms. Meridet is the Director of Operations at Ocean J Towing Limited, the company responsible for the docking and undocking of ships in the Port of Kingston. She holds a master's in logistics and supply chain management from, guess where? The Caribbean Maritime University, and a bachelor's in business administration from the University of Technology. She's passionate about the maritime sector in Jamaica and believes in playing a part to bring about meaningful change for the benefit of all, especially the seafarers. Presenters, you have 20 minutes to wow us. So I invite Ms. Meridet to begin the conversation. Let's welcome Ms. Meridet.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Madam Chair, I was a little weary because I thought that you were getting too much in the findings of my presentation because you were just giving away so much. But let me start the presentation by saying, so the topic that myself and my fellow co-authors, Professor Ibrahim Ajaguna and Lanagay Franklin Green, looked at was the Caribbean cruise industry and COVID-19, what planned strategic options exist for recovery for small island countries. And I'm starting this presentation with a conclusion from our study. We deduced that several sectors across the world, including the cruise sector, were ill-prepared to quickly respond to the negative impacts brought on by COVID-19. The pandemic exposed the vulnerability of Caribbean states, which are heavily dependent on tourism for their economic survival. The Caribbean, in particular, on the itineraries of cruise lines, are popular on the itinerary of cruise lines. However, some islands are still reeling from the effects of the pandemic, while others are struggling with costly short and medium-term survival plans. There is need, however, for long-term planning that can lift the industry out of the present crisis and enable Caribbean countries to coordinate their response efforts when managing and responding to crisis events. And I believe Mr. Telemaki had spoken earlier about coordinating our efforts as Caribbean countries. The cruise industry is a crisis-prone industry, as Madam Chair had mentioned, and has been significantly impacted in the past by both the 9/11 terrorist attacks as well as the 2008 global financial crisis, and now, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. When the terrorist attack evolved into a global crisis, which also affected the cruise industry, it quickly adopted the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, which is the ISPS code, which helped to navigate through the crisis. During the 2008 financial crisis, the global fleet of cruise ships was significantly lower and the market demand was large. What did the cruise industry do? In response, the industry lowered cruise prices and emphasized on onboard revenue. Of course, this strategy proved successful in overcoming the crisis. The COVID-19 crisis quickly evolved to epic proportions and placed the cruise lines on the verge of bankruptcy. The once vaunted tourism growth trajectories of the last decades became fragile and redundant, and the holes of over-tourism that rose to prominence in 2017 to 2019 descended into deafening silence as tourists largely disappeared. Up to 2020, cruise tourism was the fastest growing sector in the tourism industry. It took just a few weeks for the first reported COVID-19 case in the US for the pandemic to quickly spread across countries and in the process plunged economies into severe economic crisis. One of the definitions provided for a crisis is an unstable or crucial time or state of affairs in which a decisive change is impending. There is no doubt that COVID-19 had a sudden and dramatic impact on the global cruise industry, which entered into crisis mode. Carnival Cruise Lines, Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, and Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings dominate the global cruise market and have monopolized dozens of brands over decades of consolidation. However, by the half of 2020, revenues for these lines dropped by 99%. Operating margins quickly flipped into the red, and net losses went into the billions. Cruise ships sat idle as countries increasingly closed their ports and banned cruising. And I think many of us remember those images of cruise ships just languishing, can't get any port to berth because, of course, countries did not want to take on that risk, and of course, they were not prepared. Now, how do we manage unforeseen events? When the Center for Disease Control decided to shut down cruising to and from the US was when Caribbean countries felt the crisis. Darwin Telemachie, CEO of the Antigua and Barbuda Port Authority, in referencing the CDC's decision and its impact on Antigua and Barbuda, pointed out that the decision by the CDC literally shut down world cruising. And of course, I'll mention that our paper looked at Antigua and Barbuda, Jamaica, and St. Lucia. Antigua and Barbuda, as well as some other countries, including the US, had no choice but to stop cruising. To provide a perspective of the scale of the losses, in 2018, cruise tourism total economic contribution, and this is direct, indirect, and induced, to the global economy through goods and services was $150.1 billion, and this is US dollars, with 1.77 million full-time equivalent jobs. For example, St. Lucia saw a near 80% decline in their total tourism in 2020. And the story is the same for other small island states as they continue to struggle and develop recovery measures. The Caribbean's reality is that although cruise business accounts for a significant share of their gross domestic product, there is no infrastructure and adequate resource to handle a massive concentrated demand on their generally undercapitalized health system. According to Telemachie, no crisis management company, agency, or individual could have been prepared for the impact of COVID-19. However, though, there are signs of recovery. But like the phoenix, the cruise industry rose from the COVID-19 ashes by way of forward booking in 2021. In January, for example, Carnival reported that it had more advanced bookings in 2022 than it had in 2019. So out of a crisis comes an opportunity. All cruise ships that had previously visited Jamaica, for example, had indicated a return to the island by the first quarter of 2022. According to Captain Sidney Ennis, former Vice President for the Safety and Security at the Port Authority, he is now President of Port Management Services, indicated that ships visiting Jamaica were operating or had to be operating in accordance with the CDC, European Union, and domestic COVID-19 protocols. And in some instances, these ships implemented more stringent measures than what the CDC or the EU had stipulated. Some of the measures included 95% vaccination rates for guests and crew, sailing at reduced capacity, eliminating buffet services, employment of additional medical staff for dedicated isolation facilities, frequent cleaning of high-touch areas, and detailed medical plans inclusive of evacuation measures. And this, of course, is where applicable. Accordingly, some Caribbean countries, including Jamaica, implemented short-term and medium-term strategies to aid the recovery efforts of the cruise industry. Some of these strategies included vaccine mandates for tourist workers, locals interacting with tourists, inclusive of craft vendors and tour operators. Additionally, in an effort to safeguard tourists as well as locals, cruise tourists were facilitated at sites that were usually closed to the general public, preventing any intermingling. But as vaccination rates increase, the industry will see a relaxation of some of the protocols that were currently in place. In addition, the cruise lines reduced the number of passengers on board and also reduced the number of staff on board. Generally, employment will continue to suffer as long as numbers on these vessels remain low. From a regional perspective, it would be advantageous for Caribbean ports to amalgamate, and I believe Darwin had spoken about that earlier. It is good, would be good for them to coordinate and collaborate to better respond to the cruise lines. The urgency from the cruise ships' perspective is to renegotiate with ports to regain a sense of understanding and commitment as to what will happen going forward. It is also necessary for ports to ensure that they are able to obtain from cruise vessels what they require in order to secure their obligations on the ground. With regards to post-pandemic recovery efforts, Telemachus revealed that the Antigua and Barbuda had established a partnership with a private company, Global Port Holdings, to which the cruise terminal had been leased. The cruise company would now be responsible for interfacing commercially with the cruise lines in the form of head taxes and other charges they wish to apply. So in closing, the crisis caused by the pandemic presents an opportunity to rethink tourism for the future. Opportunities which at times bring about helpful change, such as more flexible use of technology, less polarization, and a revived opportunity for the appreciation of life's simple pleasures. Cruises are not a simple form of travel or an ordinary tourism product. They involve interrelations and spatio-temporal repercussions on multiple levels and require critical questioning. Prior to COVID-19, many operators had a love-hate relationship with certain destinations. They were bringing large number of tourists with minimal local benefits and major environmental impacts, and hence some of these relationships were being tested. The challenge is to rethink and then establish a new economic system that includes what is desirable and excludes what is not. The pandemic has given Caribbean destinations, as well as the world, a time to rethink, rebuild, reinvest, and revise their tourism policies, working towards a more sustainable future where large cruise ships may not be as welcomed as before. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Meredith, for your very enlightening and engaging presentation. And you know, there seems to be one theme that is coming out of so many of the presentations, and you heard it from her a while ago. What is the opportunity in adversity? And she highlighted in her presentation opportunities that came out of the crisis that the cruise lines saw. And she ended by saying, we need to rethink, rebuild, reinvest, and revise. Words for the tourism industry, cruise tourism industry. Our second presenter is going to be Mrs. Diana Spencer, who holds an MBA in International Business and a Bachelor of Arts in Production and Operations Management. She's a lecturer at Caribbean Maritime University and is currently pursuing her PhD in Sustainable Development at the University of the West Indies. Mrs. Spencer will come and address us on the topic, Cruising on Choppy Seas, the revitalization of Jamaica as a cruise destination, again, post-COVID-19. Let's welcome Mrs. Spencer.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our presentation on cruising on choppy seas. Now, we conducted this research in the middle of COVID, and so we were wondering what would have happened to the cruise industry. So wanted to look at the future of cruise industry. Now, we particularly looked at Jamaica, and we tried to get a sense of what lessons we could learn from our experience here and apply them to the Caribbean. So what were some of our objectives? Cruise industry, COVID-19 financial collapse. Caribbean cruise industry, we looked at impacts, as its impact is much more reaching, far-reaching than any other global crisis. Now let's look at COVID-19 and financial collapse. So Carnival, Royal Caribbean and Norwegian Cruise Line reported in 2020 a fall of 70% in the first quarter of that year, which was even before the no-sail order. So between mid-March and September of 2020, commercial cruise operation experienced a loss of approximately $77 billion in global economic activities. Over 500,000 jobs were lost and over $20 billion in wages as well. Now, we actually used some research questions. These were open-ended questions. Number one, we asked, based on your experience, please describe the impact of COVID-19 to cruising for destination Jamaica and local businesses. We also asked, what in your estimation is required to reset the cruise industry in Jamaica and the Caribbean, and what should be done better than pre-COVID cruise era? Now, if you think about it, we have been seeing a fall in cruise arrival, and the Jamaica Tourist Board actually reported in April 2020 to August 2020 a significant fall compared to 2019, where they had an expenditure of over 158 million US dollars, and having passengers spending an average of 101 US dollars per person. The data also showed how within the 12 months, how cruising, fell. And we see that shopping accounted for 41%. We can see attractions for 34% and others. Now, there are benefits of cruise tourism. Obvious one is job creation, and based on the cruise arrivals in 2019, it created over 1 million jobs and also a significant amount of wages and salaries. So if you think about it, it also helped with economic wealth creation, not just in wages and salaries, but also worldwide output of income of over 150 billion US dollars. We can't forget investment in technologies as well. And so they have also invested over $20 billion in investments of new technologies for the last decade. Like with any other sector, there are negative impacts as well. And when we read the literature over and over, we see a common theme throughout. And these are environmental, socio-political, and economic. We're talking about pollution, degradation of sensitive areas. We're talking about lack of regulations. And we're talking about abuse of taxes. Now let's take a look at the Caribbean region's cruise industry. Just taking a snapshot of the economic impact. Now, destinations with home ports have greater economic benefits than destinations with port of calls. And, there's a greater multiplier effect here. Pali et al. 2021 stated a cruise passenger spends less than 10 hours in a port of call, as opposed to a large portion of cruise passengers spend a night or more in a destination while they wait to embark. What we're pretty much saying here, those who spend a night over at a home port, they spend an average of 376 US per person, as opposed to an individual at a port of call who would spend 101 US dollars. And that is what we are experiencing in the Caribbean. So there is some amount of area for growth. We're also saying because the Caribbean is so attractive and passengers, we attract so many passengers, it's not ideal that we have our home porting in the US. So US holds the highest rate of passengers embarkation of 13.8 million in 2019. And so what the pandemic has done is to actually give stakeholders the opportunity to really explore home porting here in the Caribbean. They were looking at Jamaica, Antigua, Bahamas, and some other Caribbean countries. Cruise industry contributes a lot to the development of the economy, and we can see it helps with investments and spending, tourist attractions, excursion, entertainment, and you can add your own advantages as well. Now, for economic impact, looking deep further or looking deeper in the Caribbean, we see that in 2017 and 2018, there was a direct expenditure of $3.3 billion. And that resulted in, employment of over 78,000 jobs and a total wage of over 900 million US dollars. This diagram here pretty much just shows the expenditure rates here in the Caribbean, and as you can take a look here, you see that Jamaica is smack in the middle, and I believe that we have the potential to move even closer to Bahamas, or Cozumel in Mexico, who is reporting now $474 million. Now, again, the negative impacts of cruising cannot be ignored, and its effects speaks volume. Now, these floating cities contribute to unfortunate sinking of the environment. We're talking about cruise line trying to evade environmental and national labor laws and trying to go around paying their taxes. Now, based on pollution in the ocean and the need to preserve the environment, the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships were created. And these are 6 annexes, right? So Annex 1 speaks to the prevention of pollution by oil. Annex 2, prevention of pollution by noxious liquid substances, prevention of pollution by harmful substances in packaged form. Annex 4 speaks of prevention of pollution by sewage from ships. Annex 5 looks at pollution or prevention of pollution by garbage from ships. And of course, Annex 6 looks at air pollution. Now, Royal Caribbean and Caribbean Cruise Line, they are onto something, and so they have decided to invest in technologies and practices that are sustainable. You find that Royal Cruise Line, focus on treatment for their ballast water. They are very big on remaining green. When you talk about Carnival Cruise Line, they are very big on carbon footprint. They are big on water efficiency. And of course, they are saying to us, listen, we're out there in the sea doing our business, but we want to make your community safe. So whatever we can do to the environment, we will ensure that you are not at a disadvantage. Let's look at some social impacts of cruise tourism. There are some positives and negatives. So looking at the positives, of course, human capital development, that's a very good one. Destination remains relevant. There is increased wealth for the community as well. And of course, some negatives, an increase in crime. And we can attest to that. Loss of cultural diversity, excess of commodification, and the list goes on. So how did we get here? How did we gather this data for this research? Now, 3 elite interviews were done with local tourism leaders, one from the director of tourism, also the head of the Jamaica Tourist Board, deputy chairman of the Jamaica Tourist Board, chairman of the Tourism Product Development Company Limited. The 3 open-ended questions that I shared with you earlier were actually presented to them, and they pretty much share their expertise on the topic. Additional primary data was collected from major cruise lines serving the Caribbean market. We also got information from Bay West Medical in Montego Bay, giving us the account of COVID testing that was done within the resilient corridor. So key insights on the way forward were then postulated for more sustainable cruise tourism in Jamaica. Now, this is the meat of the matter. Where do we go in the future? How do we reset? And this is very, very important. So the gaps identified from the data must be filled in the following ways. Firstly, we believe that equal partnerships must be developed. Now, if you think about it, cruise line destination stakeholders need to really come together in a symbiotic way to decide on pillars of sustainability and how they can benefit mutually. They need to come up with better head taxes for destination economies, cleaner environmental practice, that's very important, investments in socially sensitive activities, and also investments in sustainable projects. Secondly, we need to promote product diversity. So we're saying Jamaica and other Caribbean destinations need to come together and implement strategies to combat sameness in each port of call. So a signature port should be established that would create enormous potential for home porting in Jamaica. And of course, this will result would be greater movement of the tourism dollar through the economy. What we are looking at is the fact that once we have a ship here in Jamaica, the passengers are given 8 hours to go on, shore and to visit sites. Most of them will return within the 4 hours, and when they are asked why this is so, they will say, listen, there's nothing left to do, or I'm being harassed. So harassment is a big issue. And what is so unique about it is that perception is it varies. So I may think that someone approaching me is harassing me when the person feels as if he or she is being friendly. So there is this delicate balance that we need to look at. So harassment prevent passengers from spending lengthy time on shore, and if they are not onshore for a long time, you know that they are not really using their monies, right? So we're not getting the money that we need to get. Destination assurance councils are to encourage an atmosphere that allows visitors to feel safe and welcome. The result will be greater local economy, improved guest-to-local relationships as well. Freedom of movement, another big one. The resilient corridor was a success. When you watched the positivity rate, you recognize that it was 1% compared to the wider society that was reporting 24% at the time. So that was a very good initiative for the Jamaican government. So we are saying there is this opportunity through carefully developed protocols to establish and market the resilient corridors as a bubble of free movement in the destination. This would position Jamaica as the leader in cruise excursions and individual experiences. Ultimately, we are saying that there are ways to position yourselves. This research that we have done has provided a short-term fix. But what we are saying, even for the long-term approaches, the need still resides around equal partnerships. We need to look at diversity of the product. We need to look at greater visitor safety and the ability for individuals to feel safe, to move around in communities, and to return on ships safely. Thank you guys very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Spencer. You know, I'm not going to have any problems with this group at all. They're keeping to time and we're on schedule. So, we're on presentation number 3. And this presentation would be on the topic. First, it will be a joint presentation between Sandra Casanova and our own Professor Ibrahim Ajaguna on the topic, an analysis of the post-COVID-19 cruise industry. Could this be a new possibility for the luxury yachting sector in the Caribbean? I will just say something briefly about one of the presenters, Ms. Casanova, who was she already spoke to us this morning, but I just, for those who may not have been here, give you some highlights about her, her profile. So among many of her areas of involvement, she is the president and founder of Cluster GAT, Caribbean's logistic and transport company. She is the vice president of the MEDEF in Martinique, and president of the Caribbean Cooperation Community. She's also been appointed to the board of the European Logistics Association. She holds, as was said this morning, a master's in logistics and supply chain management from CMU, and she authored a paper in 2017 where she earned the Emerald Literati Award. Ladies and gentlemen, let us please welcome Professor Ajaguna and Ms. Casanova for their presentation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. From the previous 2 presentations, we see the state of the cruise industry in the Caribbean and globally as well. From inception, we know that the Caribbean receives 50% of global cruise passengers. And our understanding then was also that we also receive 50% of the total waste generated globally. Very unfortunate. I think Diane spoke to that extensively. And I want to ask that the 4 presentations this evening, they are contained in this journal here. We will ask you to get a read of it. Probably by tomorrow, I have requested from Emerald 200 codes for us to give to the guests who came to this conference this evening. Now, the impact that is created by tourism industry has led industry experts, academia, to begin to diversify the tourism product over time. Unfortunately, there is none of the diversified product that was able to withstand COVID-19. We spoke about cultural tourism, green tourism, every tourism. We have asked in the past, what is green about green tourism? And still we have not been able to answer that question. Do we say that we are now witnessing the end of mass tourism? Important question. Now, if you look at that picture, that is modern day yacht. And we have some that are more bigger than this, 50 feet in length. And there is a lot of order for that. Now, for the cruise lines, Diane stated it, Natula stated it, that to attract cruisers, cruise lines have reduced their prices. Not only that, they have equally reduced capacity by 40%. What does this mean? It means that revenue to the cruise line is being reduced by 40%. And it also means that revenue to the Caribbean has equally been reduced by 40%. If we are to translate to head tax, what would this mean? It therefore means private islands may dominate over the next few years. Royal Caribbean, Carnival, they all have their own private islands. Now, if they want to run away from head tax, what do? They go to their own private islands. Commitment to safety protocol as well, Diane spoke to that, and Natula spoke to that also, is equally increasing the cost to the cruise lines. Now, let us look at the yacht industry. The industry responded well to COVID-19. The industry was not even affected in any way, because from our study, we realized that people even bought more yachts over the last 2 years than it has been in the past. Why? Because you don't have to obey a certain number of, keep this distance from this person, limited number on the yacht. And we have also observed that the industry will continue to grow with the present trajectory that we are experiencing. Now, the overall economic impact of the industry is going to what? Continue to grow, because the industry itself is very, very, should I say, fairly stable than the cruise lines. And order for yachts now very, very far overweigh the number of yachts that are coming off the waters. It is said earlier on that, I think Telmac who said it, ships make money by sailing, not by sitting in ports. What about a yacht? Yachts spend money by staying in ports and not by sailing. So when they stay in ports, destinations benefit more than when they sail. The rising standard of living also and availability of wealth to individuals is equally allowing them to invest more and to buy yachts. To charter, and to get them involved in sporting activities, which we cannot do with cruise vessels. Diane stated earlier on, what did the cruise line did? Onboard revenue. It worked out for them. But can you have onboard revenue when you are sitting at port? No. So a recent study in 2021 points out that the global yacht market, valued at $8.15 billion in 2020, is expected to expand at an annual growth rate of 5.2% from 2021 to 2022. In contrary, we are not going to see any more bigger ships than we have now, because most of these ships, they are even by centimeters bigger than each other, not by passenger count or by cruise count. The industry forecast suggests that the global yacht market will be valued at $12.16 billion by 2028. 2028 is around the corner, with 5.2% annual growth rate. And also the global yacht charter is projected to grow from $6.83 billion in 2020 to $10.82 billion in 2027, with an average global growth rate of 6.6%. You don't charter cruise vessel, you can charter yacht. You can buy a stateroom on cruise, but you can own a charter, move your vessel from one place to the other. And how does a yacht operate? And who are the people that own yachts? You have your yachts, you also have your private jet. You send your yacht ahead, and then you take flight to the destination. Board your yacht, sail for a number of days, or stay at the port for a number of days, number of weeks, sometimes even months. And this is something that we have not even attempted to tap into in Jamaica. I think Antigua and Barbuda and some other countries in the Caribbean, Sandra is going to be speaking to them, they have taken advantage of the yacht industry for a number of years. So during the pandemic, while the cruise lines take away their vessels, they were still earning from the yacht. We say that this is fueled by the ongoing rise in high net worth individuals as an increasing number of intermediaries. And likewise, the sports segment of the industry is expected to exhibit high growth owing to its use in personal activities as well as sports events. And we call this a boom for Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, St. Lucia, and probably Martinique, if we should say. Now, we can see even for European yacht charter alone, you can see the growth rate from 2016 going to 2017. And it is going at an annual growth rate of 2.6 billion in 2016, 2.7 billion in 2017, and 2.8 billion in 2018. And it is growing, while income and revenue for cruise ship is declining. So the point we are trying to make, Sandra is going to be showing you some pictures. The unfortunate thing is that many of the Caribbean islands have invested heavily in developing their cruise terminals. Falmouth is there. During the 1.5, 2 years, what income did we derive there? We have just built a new one in Port Royal. And our recommendation is that we should repurpose some of our cruise ports to accommodate yachting at the same time. If you go to Bahamas, President, you were in Bahamas for a number of years, and you'd see the type of mega yachts that are there. They come there, they gamble, they do everything, they stay in ports for a couple of weeks. A lot of income for the locals, because tourism, as we describe it, is for the local. Dan spoke to that earlier on, both economic impact. In most cases, we focus more on the economic impact as against other impacts of tourism. So we are recommending that Caribbean islands rethink how we use our ports. We cannot, COVID-19 has come to stay and is going to stay with us, we don't know how long. We will continue to manage it, but a reduction in prices and a reduction in capacity is a blow to Caribbean countries. So at this point, I'm going to ask Sandra. You can stay there, Sandra, and continue, yes, and complete it.
Thank you. So we will continue with a comparison between a cruise ship and luxury yacht. In luxury yacht, people, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. In luxury yacht, we can say feelings of being at home is there, more personalized service and experiences, suitable for visit to small ports, suitable for river cruise and visits to remote areas, suitable for shallow waters, brings cruisers close to cultures, feeling of being at sea, more variety in itineraries, highly profitable through charters. So different on a mega cruise, it's okay, you are on the boat, but it's not like you feel the sea. So ocean and sea bound, larger variety of entertainment, sports, wellness center, restaurant and bar, highly profitable through economies of scale, but you feel like in a hotel experience and broader range on board revenue. So best yachting destination is the Caribbean. It's Antigua, also St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, St. Barthélemy, British Virgin Islands. Top 10 Caribbean yacht charter locations: British Virgin Islands, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Bart's, St. Martin and Saint Martin, St. Lucia, Martinique, St. Kitts and Nevis, Montserrat, Turk and Caicos, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So the case of French Caribbean, since March 2020, the date of the first lockdown linked to the pandemic, no cruise ship has docked and the sector-related stakeholders are at a standstill. According to the development agency, the French development agency, the cruise industry facilitates 850 direct and indirect jobs, and on average, visitors spend 18.1 million euros each year. Given all the changes that are occurring, Martinique is developing a wider range of services independent of cruise tourism. For example, the political authorities and private stakeholders have collaborated to identify the unique assets of the island so that heritage can be positioned at the center of the tourist offer, so also is a luxury yacht business. So some pictures from Martinique, like a luxury yacht in Marina, in the southern part of Martinique. We have a cruise port in Martinique too. Another picture of a cruise port in Martinique. And a picture of the port of Martinique, one of the sides of the port of Martinique. Barbados cruise and cargo port. Antigua cruise port. Falmouth, Jamaica. So opportunities in the Greater Caribbean. In many Caribbean islands, the contribution made by the yachting sector probably surpasses that of the cruise ship sector. However, the size of the contribution is largely unknown and is not recognized by government and the public at large, and so a better framework of yachting information is needed. The case of Errol Flynn Marina. Errol Flynn Marina and Boat Trail is located on the coast of Port Antonio, Jamaica, and it is one of the most spectacular port destinations in the Caribbean. Sorry. It's Errol Flynn. Yeah? Yes? Errol. Sorry about that. Yes. So in conclusion, it is important to note that no dramatic downward trend has been recorded in relation to the super yacht industry in the Caribbean or globally as a result of the pandemic. Rather, the industry has been experiencing a boom since March 2020. This is in contrast to the cruise business that was shut down for more than a year as a result of the global lockdown. Given the impact of the COVID-19, Jamaica and the other Caribbean islands should take advantage of the opportunity presented by the luxury yacht market and repurpose their cruise terminals to accommodate expanding yacht markets. I thank you.
Quite a contrast from the first two presentations, in which these researchers are proposing a focus on the yachting industry, as a untapped niche. Yes, Prof? An untapped niche. Quite interesting. Our final presentation this afternoon in this section, the one male in our panel this afternoon. Maybe we're leaving the best for last. Sorry. But he was a co-presenter. Yeah, sorry about that. So, Dr. Errol Mclean is going to speak on the topic, can Jamaica's cruise administrators re-strategize, strengthen inclusiveness, expand attractions, and gather more revenue? Just to tell you a little bit about Dr. Mclean. Dr. Mclean is a scholar practitioner, and he's the Vice President of Planning and Development at the Caribbean Maritime University. He was a co-editor in Volume 14 of the World Hospitality and Tourism Themes and published the article, Can Jamaica's Cruise Administrators Re-Strategize, Strengthen Inclusiveness, Expand Attractions, and Gather More Revenue? His education entails a Doctor of Education in Adult Education from Walden University, a Master of Business Administration, and a Bachelor of Arts in English, and a Diploma in Teaching English and History being the major. Ladies and gentlemen, let us please welcome our final presenter in this section, Dr. Errol Mclean. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Myrna. And I have to say thanks to everyone who continued to remain seated and compose. I'm happy that a few students are still here. Thanks again, and we will be very brief. So it's a long question, and for each time that we contemplate that question, I'm sure there will be more answers. It's not a question that can be answered and in any finality, because things continue to emerge and conditions continue to change. So the purpose of this paper then was to explore if Jamaican authorities can improve revenue earnings from the cruise tourism in the COVID-19 period by improving the standard of current attractions, adding new ones, and allowing more citizens to participate. Here's a picture on the screen that I wanted to sort of engage persons on. If you can, particularly your students, look at it. Does it make any sense to you? The idea is that, does anything jump out at anybody? In the cruise business, there are various perspectives to the market. Yes? There are many key players, and each key player, they have a different perspective, something different that they want to come out of that, right? You may see some in the picture doing horseback riding out there in the waters, right? You see three ladies standing by and they are taking pictures, and you see others lounging and so on. But what do we see of the cruise ships? we see dollars, right? Dollars there. Their motivation is to earn big dollars, and certainly to the left of the screen there, you see a lady or somebody sitting there and some dollars there. We're talking about governments, they have to collect their head tax. So to that, what we're really saying there is that there are different perspectives to that industry. So what we're saying here is that, and much has been said, that earnings have plummeted since COVID, and that is true. And what you're seeing on the screen there, in 2018, what the earnings were like, 18.9 billion Carnival, Norwegian 5.8. But in any case, we know that since the COVID situation, earnings plummeted. But it was really good business. Now, what we are seeing here now, head tax charged in the region, and I notice if you look from a high of $1.50 from a low of $1.50 to a high of $18 per person who disembark a ship at a port, Jamaica taking the lion's share. And then the question arose or was proposed that maybe there should be greater synergy, integration, collaboration among Caribbean. The fact is that islands. The fact is that cruise ships negotiate with each island separate. The question is, should they negotiate with the Caribbean island as en bloc, as against in separate terms? But the cruise ship, they know what they're doing, and they do have that capacity. And it's a sort of power play that takes place. So when they negotiate with each island separately, they can get a different thing. The fact, though, if you look at it, though, who is going to give up? And this is what makes coming together more difficult. Not everybody is earning the same amount. And so it's going to make it real difficult because if they were to agree to negotiate en bloc, because somebody will have to give up something. The question, who is willing to do that? So it remains a problem, right? So the case of private islands that was mentioned, pretty much all cruise ships, they have their own private islands. And these days, which means that they do have an option not to actually come to our ports, but instead to go to their own private island. And nowadays, we are also hearing, even though this was not in the paper, but we are hearing about cruises to nowhere. Right? Cruises to nowhere. So that is actually taking place, which means that they do not necessarily have to come into our space. But it is still unlikely that they will limit the experience of guests by just simply confining to their particular island. But there are some things which, to answer the question, that we'd want to put forward. More Jamaicans need to start working on board cruise ships. The question that we are asking about re-strategizing. We are suggesting that more Jamaicans need to start working on cruise ships, right? Cruise lines could offer more authentic Caribbean experience, because certainly as Caribbean people, we are better able to tell our story, and they see us, we have that kind of Caribbean spirit, which I'm not so sure that can be replicated elsewhere. Significantly more Jamaicans must be fully vaccinated. It is still a debate issue, but to keep the industry going, that is one of those things that would be recommended. Jamaica's close proximity to the U.S. could result in lower employment costs as well as shorter lead times, and really costs to bring persons from so further afield. So this could also work to our advantage if more Caribbean people or more Jamaicans were engaged as workers on the cruise ships. More Jamaicans could be engaged and more attractions could be developed. Example, one of the suggestions at John Rollins Success Primary School. And there may be other areas right now which could be equally attractive but are not currently used. So we are actually making the point that we could actually expand the attraction. So guests, when they come, there are more things to see and to participate in. We're also saying more training for Jamaicans to refine their products and service offering. The point was made about the Jamaican person. We can be perceived on the aggressive side, even though we may not think that so, but it can be scary to the guests. So with some training and refinement, we could probably curtail our approach and be more acceptable to the guests. So some training in terms of our own approach and so on, as well as the products that we offer. And we also could continue to improve our road network to allow access to attractions further from the cruise ports. And a good case in point, for example, the St. Thomas highway that is underway, that will be a good improvement to the whole product. And we think also now of the Port Royal port, which we'll expect that with the completion of that port of the roadway leading to St. Thomas, that the port in Port Royal could be much better used and more actively used port, so that guests would be able to access other attractions on this side of the island. So a final thought then is that, and this is the point I just made, is that Kingston and the east turn end of the island, we're not necessarily usually accustomed to having cruisers come here. Not too long ago, a few years ago, it was a refreshing thing to see a cruise ship docking in the port of Kingston, and there was much talk about that. I believe that with the opening of the highway leading into St. Thomas, we should see more of those activities. So for more details on this paper, Prof. Ajaguna did indicate that it's published. You can see it online, and you can also read it in the publication. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much.
So we've come to the end of this very interesting segment, looking at the cruise industry, now that the coronavirus, what's happening after COVID cruise, the future of the cruise industry. I know it's late, but I don't know if we can take one or two questions from, I saw a hand. Is there any other person? So, okay. Please, ask your question, sir.
Congratulate the presenters. I thought it was very thought-provoking from Natola, from Diana, from Prof. and Sandra, and completing with Dr. Mclean. My question relates to, and it's particularly targeted at Diana and Natola. How can we extract more revenue from the cruise shipping industries? And I want to preface it with a comment. There's a correlation between cargo shipping and cruise shipping, but we tend to separate the two. And in Diana's presentation, she mentioned that, from a port of call passenger, you get about $100, just over $100 in revenue, where for a home porting passenger, it's about $370 or something like that. That's almost, 4 to 1. But there are some statistics that indicate we're not capturing the full spend, because there was a survey that was done that showed that cruise shipping passengers actually spend a lot on buying duty-free goods and also on terms of craft. So what we lack in the region in terms of cruise shipping is what the person can be motivated to spend on. So it comes back to my question, the correlation between the cargo side. How can we put in place greater attractions, greater craft? Because you go in a typical craft store like in Falmouth, 95% of the goods are made in China and in some little cheap crafts. But when you compare the spend of the same cruise passengers in Asia, it's probably 2-3 times what is spent in the Caribbean. So back to my question, how can we get passengers to, how can we extract more? How can we motivate the tourist cruise shipping passenger to spend more? It's a rhetorical question. How can we get them to spend more? What can we do to get them, offer them that will motivate them to spend more? Whether it's in the duty-free shops, whether it's in the attractions, in a unique experience to increase that spend.
Okay, any one of the presenters would like to take that question?
Yes, I'd like to take that
Mrs.
question.
Spencer, go ahead.
So it's not something that we can fix overnight. So I lived in the Bahamas for several years, and in the Bahamas I was able to walk on any hotel, and we could go there and just have a dinner. We could go there and just swim and go home. Nobody cares, right? In Jamaica, I used to say to myself, why is it that we can't have something like this in Jamaica? But we don't have anybody harassing us in Bahamas so much. So the bigger picture is that we have to start dealing with our problems at home, which is crime, right? When I went to France once, I don't remember where we went, and someone held on to my hand. He was putting on something on my hand. Somebody was putting on something on my neck. I felt awful. Stop touching me. And so we have to create this environment where persons can feel safe. And we have to allow our guests to be able to go around in the community, because that's where the multiplier effect will come, when they can see something made by us locally, because we have a lot of things made locally here, but they are not being able to go there to seat themselves. They are locked away on the ship, or if they come off the ship, they are sent to particular attractions. And so if we can get our environment or the society in a different way to say, hey, just allow them to come to you, allow them to come into a particular community and feel safe, then they will see even bun and cheese and want to try it. So I believe that we have to fix our problems here first, where crime is concerned, and then we can start creating that culture.
Okay. That's the first. Is there any other panelists who would like to respond?
No, sorry. As a co-author, if I may.
Yes.
Yes, as a co-author, yes.
Wouldn't say no to you at all.
So Diana is quite right. I think, so kind of what the paper pointed to is, one, if we're not spending enough time, yes, inland, onshore, experiencing, then we're likely to spend less. That's one. Two, if every time we go to a space we're seeing more of the same, then the first time we buy, the second time we need not buy. Three, I think we ignore one very important thing about the current cruise passenger that comes, right? And I've been doing a lot of work on all-inclusives. The assumption that an individual or the kind of traveler who would rather have an all-inclusive experience, or would rather have what's considered to be the transient cruise experience, that he or she wants to extract much more out of their pockets after having paid for an all-inclusive vacation, is something we need to stop confusing ourselves about. So what do? We need to create diversity at our ports. We also need to get a sense of ownership from locals about the product. If we get ownership from locals about the product, we're in a very different place. Diana spoke about the Bahamas. You go in the craft markets. If you come to my brother, Eric, and Eric doesn't have what you want, Eric will say, go to Andrew. I've seen it repeatedly. It's like a conveyor belt of guests moving through the craft markets. Our craft markets is a very different environment. Everybody is, it's a fight. It's a fierce competition. So again, the environment has to change significantly. We also have to look at the kinds of people we're attracting. We also have to be true to ourselves about this notion that somehow someone who comes on a cruise ship is likely to come back as stopover. The data suggests otherwise. Very minimal.
Please. This would be our final question.
Thank you very much, Prof. and Diana. I think excellent observations you both made. I want to add to it that when you go to the Barbados, Barbados is like my second home. You get up 1 a.m., you tell the receptionist you're going on the road. They say, enjoy yourself. In Jamaica, 4 p.m., you tell the receptionist you're going on the road, they say, be careful. And one thing that we did not get right is this. If you go to Falmouth and you go on the vessel, if you look down into Falmouth, what do you see? Sign of poverty. And that is what Diana was speaking to. When you see that sign of poverty, you don't want to get there. You are afraid. You are afraid of whatever type of crime. The majority of the cruise passengers, they come down, stay in the terminal, and go back up for lunch. They do not venture on the street. And another way by which we can get them to spend more money is this. If you look at Montego Bay Cruise Terminal, for example, it's a distance from the craft market.
Right.
You go to a supermarket, there are certain things they want you to buy, they put them very close to the cashier. When you get to the cashier, you pick them. If you go to St. Martin, for example, the craft market is in a close proximity to the terminal. So when you go on excursion, because you don't have time to go and shop when you go on excursion, when you come back, you're going to do your purchases, at the craft market in the terminal. They do it in Falmouth, but what they do, they lock us outside of the gate.
Right.
And they put the inbound shops in there. And the revenue from there goes to who? Not to the locals. So we have to rethink the way we do tourism in Jamaica, for example.
Yes.
Thank you, Diana, for...
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to allow the distinguished doctor from Antigua to ask his question.
I just say that the Falmouth experience has to be couched in the context that the cruise lines built that port and they built it specifically to their own needs. Yeah. So it's void of local involvement and local interest. You can see it by the way they fence off the fence. It was built as a fantasy land in an environment that doesn't have as much fantasies for everybody. So that's another story. But I have a question to the young lady. You did this study, presented it very, very well. All of you did. I was particularly intrigued by the cruise, and I had to leave to answer a call. I'm so sorry. But I have a question. There is a need from well, it's a climate change related question, one that I try to address as best as I can. The need for shore power is becoming a very major issue. We are going to the FCCA in Santo Domingo in about a month, and every shipping line wants to have a sit down with every port manager. There's one question they ask: do you have shore power? Now, shore power for a cruise ship requires at least 10 megawatts to 15 megawatts per ship. That means that if you have 5 ships in your harbor, you are pulling in more than your local grid can actually produce. Yes. So in the context of the emerging regulations that exist for ships to have clean green energy, how is Jamaica shaping itself? I have a suggestion, but I'd like to hear from Jamaica. What are they thinking as it relates to that strategy? Because if we can get shore power right, you can fix a lot of social problems with the benefits you get. Because if you allow the ship to plug up to your shore power and it's clean, you can make a lot of money.
Revenue.
And the ship translates that into carbon credits. And so what's an expense shifts on the balance sheet as an asset. So it's a win-win if we can do it. What is Jamaica's strategy? Do you have a plan? We have an idea. I'll probably share it, but I'd like to hear your plan.
Who would like
If
to
you
take
have
that
one.
question?
I don't know if there's...
She says her co-presenter. So let me speak from a different hat now, as the former tourism guy who used to run the tourism agency in Jamaica. This discussion has been ongoing. The challenge we have, as Doc said to me in a side note, is that we have a serious challenge with the monopoly of our space and how that monopoly is managed in terms of power. And that has crippled some of those discussions, because we have not gone to a stage as yet where we've toyed with a few things, like Wigton Wind Farm and other kinds of things that could potentially give us an energy source. The reality is that we don't have many options immediately in our space. So certainly I'd be happy to hear the suggestion. Let me loop it back to you.
Okay, so I'll only say it if we agree to cooperate.
Absolutely.
This is one area where the Caribbean needs to come together to fix this problem. We are designing an LNG plant at our port. Now, that's against the grain of the monopoly by the local power company. But ports have their own defined little territory that we can use some muscle to say we're going to do what we want. And some of us are that bold that we go ahead and do it. So we're going to have a LNG plant that will be able to transfer power to the ship. It's not totally green, but it's allowed the ships to have some power source that can afford to not shut down the island or create further problems. So here's the deal. If we have one, which would be the only one in the Caribbean, we are no good. Because you can't just come to Antigua to get, you can't retrofit your engines just to get power from Antigua. So we need to be strategic in designing north to south placements of these facilities in a collaborative manner so none of us owns it. For the first time, we could have a system where regionally all the ports agree to facilitate the establishment of these facilities, and we broaden the benefit so that all the ports can benefit from that, because some are going to have to give up not having one. Now, I say this because not every country is willing to say, oh, you go ahead. Every country is going to say, I want, I want, I want. Then we have 19 plants, and it becomes a waste of money, and it doesn't work. So the modality has to be built where it's a regional concept. So I presented that at a CIFA, CIFA meeting in Miami last week, where we put a plant in Jamaica, and we have the resource and the personnel to do that. We put one somewhere just south of Jamaica, one in Antigua, one in Barbados, one in Trinidad. That allows for ships to be able to, wherever they go on the archipelago, you have a source where you can fuel. If we get that agreement, because it's an industry-wide issue, if you only allow those 5 countries to benefit, it's a no deal. So here's a CARICOM opportunity. Oh my God.
Here we go again, right?
Yeah. But in reality, if we can do that, the revenue from coal ironing, which is what that process is called, will outpace our earnings at the ports for both cargo and the head tax. So we can diversify that and help strengthen the other ports and finally have a solution that works. Now, if the other markets say no, we're still going ahead to do ours. We will do the ships that come, but it'll only be a small piece. But we have the people with the money, the technology, and they're ready to do it. So if you have your Jamaica people on the port side, I know they're not here, I'm ready to start having the discussion.
If I may just quickly, not to cross-talk too much, I think the time is right for that kind of discussion. And so the people who need to put you together to have a discussion will do so, because there are other major developments about to take place now in terms of our ability from an infrastructure perspective to be able to service large vessels in Jamaica. And so, Pat,
sorry.
Yes, I can stop. I can stop.
You know, I really want to draw attention to Professor Brown and Professor Jaguna, you know, what is the topic that is lighting up this afternoon that has us here until 5:10? I'd like to have my colleague, my friend here, please ask your question, sir. Please.
Yes. I actually was in Nunavut in northern Canada last week, and one of the topics of discussion was the cruise industry, because there's a considerable interest in cruise liners going through the Northwest Passage, and it's part of the whole marketing of the Arctic as last chance tourism. People are going to see the Arctic while it's still frozen. And they've had problems with the cruise industry not buying things because of a different reason. Most of the materials are made out of marine mammals, and people can't take them home. Mm-hmm. So they're not spending money when they arrive. Mm-hmm. So what people have been doing is creating experiences for the tourists. They're not going to buy things, they're going to experience something that they've never experienced before. Mm-hmm. Dog sled ride, watching people make things out of seal, learning how the Inuit have hunted, and it becomes a very different way of people spending money. People are less inclined, and I'm part of the demographic that the cruise industry depends on. You know, I'm old, I'm gray, and I'm middle class. And that's the target for the cruise industry. We don't need stuff. We don't need knickknacks, but we need experiences. Yeah. And has Jamaica considered, and I'll be talking with you after about Antigua and Barbuda, but has Jamaica considered rethinking what tourists do when they arrive?
Yes. Okay, thank you so much for your input. Ladies and gentlemen, I will close by summarizing briefly. What is the opportunity in diversity? What is the opportunity in diversity? Yes. So these cruise lines, they are coming to our shores in Jamaica, but we're not getting the revenue we would like to get from them. What's the opportunity? And we heard several possibilities this afternoon. But one of the presenters spoke on the yachting industry as a possibility. Another spoke on several strategies. However, coming to the close, there seemed to be a consensus. I was hearing all of the presenters nodding and saying yes, that the social issues that face us in Jamaica need to be addressed. Now I want to tell you, about 20 minutes ago, Carlton and I were having a discussion. When I was at university in Trinidad doing my master's in tourism development and management, I read the writings of Dr. Keith Nurse. And it was interesting that he spoke about the brain drain of Jamaica. And if you have your qualified nationals looking outside of Jamaica to find employment and to make, their lives following graduation from university, then, I want you to think about the impact of that on social issues within the community. We were talking about that just a while ago. And finally, the coming together for the head tax, for the plug-in, the coal ironing, the coming together of these islands. I go back to Federation, I go to Cricket, I go to CARICOM. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for, and I want to tell you, there are 5 students in the room this afternoon who are studying to work on cruise lines. Could you all stand? They are reading for the Bachelor of Science degree in cruise shipping and marine tourism. They ushered you all in this afternoon. It's all part of getting them into that attitude of hospitality. These are my students. Thank you so much. And to the presenters, 3 tokens of appreciation. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give Mrs. Myrna Ellis Medina a round of applause. There's a certain verve that Myrna brought to moderating that, gave us that too much energy for the waning hours. And it was wonderful to hear the presentations, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. And Myrna was doing so well, and then she spoke about cricket. So close. I remember having to stay up to watch these cricket matches with my father. And then she just came and bowled us a Yorker. Kind of got us. But we thank you so much for staying with us. Thank you for the spirited discussion throughout the day and just now. And, the race does not always belong to the swift, but to those that endure to the end. Today is finished, and it was a wonderful day. Thank you for making it so. To our various presenters, for those who are listening online, to Power 106 FM, the Gleaner Company, and to our hosts here at the Jamaica Conference Centre, to our Chunks Catering family, and we remember the Universal Service Fund, Freight Handlers Limited, and our other sponsors, USF, my co-chair, USF Freight Handlers Limited, and who are other sponsors? You're going to tell us shortly. Lannerman and Morris, how could we forget? We are so grateful. Tomorrow, thank you. Tomorrow, I am happy that Mrs. Spencer, and co-author, mention the social issues, because we begin tomorrow with a bang at 9. We'll be registering from 8 with a power panel for security. Promises to be excellent. We have practitioners from the Jamaica Constabulary Force. We have consultants who have passed through the Constabulary Force. And we have one who headed the force. And no, he does not behave like Renita Adams, but he has ideas. And we are going to hear all this excitement tomorrow. And then we will have our more academic papers as we go through. Tomorrow we finish at about 2. It's Friday evening, and we want Mr. Telemac to get some fish at Glorious. Right. So thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen. To my Caribbean Maritime Institute family, Dr. Kirkland Anderson, who has been queuing up all the presentations and holding down that part of it. To all the people over there, you know yourselves. God bless you. We are here again. And, when you are tired, your brain goes into all sorts of loops. Caribbean Maritime backspace deletes Caribbean Maritime University family. Thank you so much, Professor Spencer. Give yourselves a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. And then turn to our production team at the back and give them a round of applause. What a beautiful set of people. And there is our secret weapon. I'm going to ask him to stand. Mr. Archibald Gordon, please stand. And this team. Excellence is Archie's normal way of working. See you tomorrow. God bless you. Thank you.